Welcome, good morning, and Kamamgani. So, where are we today? We are taking you to this little town in Rajasthan. It's a city. And I'm not going to tell you too many things about the city because we have a very accomplished presenter with us today. Bundi. Bundi in the Haroti region of Rajasthan. With it's kind of nestled in a little narrow valley within the Aravali Hills. And at a point of time in history, it was ruled by the Hara Chauhans. And there's so much wealth and heritage that they created while they were there. There are beautifully designed palaces, and the place just has something so charming about it. And it's tucked away. It is not found. Sometimes when we talk about going to Rajasthan, I think a lot of us get so enamored by just thinking of the other cities that are more popularized that somewhere I think Bundi gets left a little on the side, but that probably has also helped to keep its charm. Bringing us, or rather taking us today to Bundi is, as I said, a very accomplished architect, Charudat Deshmukh. Charudat is an architect and an urban planner. He was born in Gwalior. He went on to do his architecture from Nagpur, and then he went on to do his master's from the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. So he has a lot of understanding of how the Indian architectural scene has emerged. And he not only therefore brings the old and the heritage, that's the part that he's going to talk about today, but how the old heritage and the architectural wonders of India actually come and gel with the contemporary India that we all live in. He, incidentally, is also a major contributor to the Mumbai International Airport. And we all know that Mumbai International Airport has been voted as one of the best airports in the world. So we are extremely proud to have you with us today, Charudat. And it's our privilege that you are presenting to us Bundi, a place that became, I think, his heart's delight, because he mentioned to me before the webinar that that was the place he chose to write his thesis on when he was doing his master's. And then, of course, he got busy with doing the usual things of an architect. And in 2014, the simplicity of Bundi, as he put it, took him back. And now he's completing a book, which is soon to be finished. I think in the next 1 year, he's hoping to launch the book on the architectural heritage of a forgotten Rajput capital. So welcome, Charudat. And we look forward to a very engaging and interesting session with you.
So good morning, everybody. And I'm here to present a brief account of the architectural heritage of this fascinating but forgotten Rajput capital located in southeastern Rajasthan, named Bundi. It has had a long history of more than 400 years, and therefore, to condense this vast architectural heritage, I've tried to present this in three parts. First is about its political and social history in brief. More importantly, the growth as to how the city grew, because that laid the foundation for the architectural development that were to happen subsequently. In the second part, we go to the crux of the matter, that is the architectural heritage that Bundi created in its history of 400 years in terms of six primary building typologies, and trying to keep it simple, avoiding too much of architectural jargon. That is fort, mahal, baudis, kunds, sagar mahals, and the chhatris. And finally, the third part as to what is the contemporary potential and use of this vast architectural heritage of Bundi. In the shadows of the power centers of medieval India, like Jaipur, Udaipur, even Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, Delhi, Agra, resided small historic towns, which today are largely unknown beyond their current geographical context. These remote towns, although unheralded, with their glorious history and heritage, inspire a quest to explore them. Bundi, the erstwhile capital of Rajput province, known as Hadoti, is one such place. And my association with Bundi, as Rupinder ma'am mentioned, started sometime in early 1990s and has continued since then. Bundi is also known as City of Step Wells, also alternatively as Blue City, and also as Choti Kashi. Its vast architectural heritage includes a majestic Gad Mahal, 4 Sagar Mahals, more than 50 Bawris, more than 20 kunds, 4 lakes, 25 darwajas, more than 100 chhatris and 100 temples. So you can understand in a small place like Bundi how much of effort was put in last 400 years by the Hada Rajputs and the community as a whole to create this magnificent heritage. The walled city of Bundi with its narrow streets, havelis and colored houses is in itself a part of its built heritage. This account is an untold story of this small medieval town seemingly buried in time and history. A lot of people have not yet visited Bundi, but fortunately for us, some of the earliest visitors to this place have reported their first impressions, like Rudyard Kipling, wherein mentioned that despite what he has seen all over Rajasthan, the Gad Mahal of Bundi ranks among the best that he has ever seen in India or elsewhere, simply because of his rustic ambience and forceful architectural character, which we shall see in greater detail. Coming to its location, Bundi is located in southeastern part of Rajasthan. Is my cursor visible?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Except that I'm, such a pity we can't see you, but that's about the only thing we are missing. Yeah. Please carry on.
So it is located on southeastern Rajasthan, about 200 kilometers south of Jaipur. And its location has to be seen in the historical context. Bundi, as I said, was capital of the province of Hadoti, which was ruled by the Hada Rajputs. And it was surrounded by the belligerent Mewar kingdom to the left, to its west, Jaipur state to its north. In Agra to its northeast were the Mughals, and to the south in Malwa were the Sultans and eventually the Marathas. So it had had a turbulent history because being a small state, it required several resources to counter these political forces. Here we can see the physical and geographical context in which Bundi was located at a micro level. It is located in the Aravalli Hills. This is the Aravalli Hill range. And here you can see the principal capital cities or power centers which existed during that time. Gwalior, Jaipur, Ajmer, Chittor, Udaipur, Agra, Delhi, and Mandu down south were the major power centers during those times. Kota came up much later as a younger cousin of Bundi, which was branched off later on from the state of Bundi by the Mughals. The history of Bundi and its evolution from its character as a small hamlet of the Meena tribes into a Rajput capital city has been a tough one. However, it is largely unrepresented to appreciable extent in the history of India. This history can be seen in 3 phases: pre-Mughal, during Mughal, and post-Mughal phase. This just for convenience. There is a certain amount of continuity between these phases, obviously, but it's easier to understand this way. Before the Mughal period, this area, as I said, was occupied by the Bhil tribes, Meena and Bhil tribes. Rao Deva Singh, who was the chief of Hada Chauhan and who was serving the Rana of Mewar, traveled east of Mewar to capture more territories. And one region which he captured was the Bunda Valley. It was called Bunda Valley because of the tribal chief Bunda, who resided and ruled over this valley prior to the Rajputs coming to this region. And after it was conquered by the Rajputs, it came to be known as Hadoti, meaning the country of Hadas. Rao Deva Singh became the first ruler of Bundi, but he did not rule for a long period. The second period, in 1569, Akbar invaded this region primarily to gain the fort of Ranthambore, which was held by Rao Surjan Singh Hada, who was serving as the general of Rana of Mewar. After intense resistance, Rao Surjan Singh handed over fort of Ranthambore to the Mughals. Bundi became an independent state after that, as Akbar appointed Rao Surjan Singh as his general and made him the chief of the province of Bundi. And he was conferred upon a title of Rao Raja. This tradition continued, and all the rulers of Bundi subsequently, after Rao Surjan Singh, served the Mughals as their governors as well as their generals throughout the next 4 centuries. After the decline of Mughal power, Bundi was annexed by the then rulers of Kota, but Rao Raja Umesh Singh won back Bundi in 1748. The golden period of Bundi is during this period when it was under the Mughal rule. Bundi reached its zenith in these 200 years under the Mughal rule, and most of its architectural and artistic heritage was created during this period. After the demise of the Mughals, by then Rao Raja Bhishan Singh was the ruler. He provided assistance to British East India Company against the Marathas, but the Marathas won, and Bundi had to pay a very heavy price for it. Finally, in 1818, the Rao Raja of Bundi signed alliance with the British East India Company, and eventually in 1948, Rao Raja Bahadur Singh signed the instrument of accession, merging Bundi into Indian Republic. In this political history of Bundi, which I presented in brief, just an outline, because our focus is different, there are certain things which emerge not only from its politics, but the social and cultural characteristics of the times, and particularly of the royal family. We need to understand that Hada Rajputs have a special place in history of Rajasthan. They were fearless warriors, often laying down their life at very young age. Most of the Hada rulers died before the age of 30, fighting either for Rana of Mewar or for the Mughals. Owing to this, several times a Hada child ascended the throne of Bundi. Therefore, the role of the queen and the divan and of Daima, the royal nurse, became very important. This has big implications in its architectural as well as cultural developments that happened. Therefore, I am mentioning this. Dhabai, the son of the Daima, although unrelated by blood, was usually very close to the Hada ruler. In several instances in Bundi's history, the Dhabai played a major role in royal and administrative affairs of Bundi. Most importantly, when Rao Raja Surjan Singh surrendered the fort of Ranthambore to the Mughals, there in Rajasthan, a perception persisted that the proud Hada Rajputs had surrendered their pride to the aggressor. Therefore, the Rao Rajas of Bundi had to fight this perception through their action throughout their history to redeem their pride. But despite their efforts to make amends for their association with the Mughal Empire, their association with Mughals also exposed them to Mughal culture and led to significant influence on culture, art, and architecture of Bundi. Now, this particular point is somehow concealed deliberately in contemporary literature and conversation in contemporary Bundi, which needs to be considered when we appreciate the overall architectural heritage of Bundi, that it had considerable influence of the Mughals in its development. Now we come to the city form of Bundi, which is actually the canvas on which the rest of the architectural developments and its architectural heritage was created. These, as I said, the entire city of Bundi is located within a small valley amidst the Aravalli Hills. And therefore, the evolution and physical growth of Bundi was influenced by its location, environmental context, and its political history. Right on top of the tallest hill, this is the hill named as Taragarh, which is almost about 250 meters above the sea level, the city level. And this area was called as Bunda Kanal. Nal means a valley, and Bunda because named after the Meena tribal chief. After Rao Deva Singh conquered or annexed this territory from the Meenas, the fort was built on top of this Taragarh hill, and it was named as Taragarh, largely because of its proximity at the night as it was seen from the city or the valley below to the stars up in the dark sky. With gradual influx of migrants, largely Rajput nobles from surrounding territories, soldiers, craftsmen, a city developed, a small habitat developed at the foothill of the fort itself. And then the whole city grew in the valley below. So the origin development started at Taragarh Fort, and then gradually it moved downwards towards south and east into the valley between these two hills. And it was later fortified as the city expanded. So most of the developments that we're going to see happened on this fort. This is the palace, Garh Mahal, which sits midway between the city and the fort on top. And then other developments are within the walled city and surrounding it. The political stability from their association with Mughals fueled the ambitions of Bundi rulers, making them venture out of Taragarh, which they built in the early 15th and 16th century. While the original palace was built here, they built a large new palace at the foothill of Taragarh outside the fort. In most of the other cities, medieval cities in India, you'll find the palace being constructed inside the fort. But here the new palace was built outside, indicative of the security and strength Hada Rajputs had gained by that time, which permitted them to venture outside the fort. Due to its location, Garh Mahal became the focus of the entire cityscape of Bundi city. And it commanded a great view of the entire hinterland as well as of the city, which was necessary for the rulers during those times. The development of Garh Mahal started in 1585 by then Rao Raja of Bundi, Bhoj Singh, who built the first palace. And then an entire cluster of palace was built over a period of next 200 years. This view illustrates how the city grew and its connection and relationship with its natural setting. So these are the Aravalli Hills, and this is the view from north towards south. So you can see the Garh Mahal on the right side as it steps down, cascading down towards the valley. And this is the walled city. You can see the walls over here, and in the next image, you will see a reverse view. The walled city, as you can see, seemingly look up to Garh Mahal and the Taragarh fort above the Garh Mahal, while being secured within its fortified walls, both metaphorically as well as physically. This vantage location of Garh Mahal, visible from entire valley below, made it focus of Bundi skyline. Now this is the other view from the southern side towards north. So this is how people saw, the citizens of Bundi saw the palace and the fort every day. Always in view, Garh Mahal was reassuring sight for residents of Bundi during turbulent times, and Taragarh on top of the hill stood as guardian of the city. This close physical and functional relationship between the fort, the palace, and the walled city is a unique feature of Bundi. Garh Mahal and Taragarh are connected by a steep paved path, and they are bound in the same single wall. And in fact, there are 3 walls, but it has a contiguous enclosure, and therefore they served as a unified establishment. The Garh Mahal seems to cascade down from into the valley, clasping the entire settlement in its arms. Now we go and look into some of the features of this walled city, which make the city very unique. Apart from the form and the location of Garh Mahal and the fort, streets of Bundi provide a distinctive identity to this place. They penetrate this dense settlement in an informal order like most medieval cities of India. But apart from enabling movement and connectivity, these streets also perform important role as facades of settlement fabric of the city itself. The streetscapes of Bundi physically and symbolically embody socio-economic cultural characteristics of resident community through their architectural quality. The intimate scale of the narrow streets and the build forms defining them around them generate dynamic views and vistas. So there is a constant element of surprise and diversity through the entire internal cityscape of Bundi. Royal or civic structures like these that you see over here were built along these streets and painted in color of sandstone like Kotwali Darwaza, Nagar Pol, Maji Sahab Ki Haveli, to signify the association with royal authority. So this color of sandstone was associated with royal authority. Color has an important role in Bundi, as you will see. The streetscapes of Bundi are very intimate and unpretentious, unlike those in some of the other cities of Rajasthan, particularly in Shekhawati. They present a unique, honest, endearing complexity of moderate scale, entirely different from the character of street facade in Jaisalmer and Shekhawati, or even Jaipur. Extensive use of color on external facade of houses imparts unique radiance and vibrancy. Vibrant blue or indigo color was used by Kshatriyas and Brahmins for their houses. They evolved a color code over a period of time for houses of different communities. The Vaishyas and Jains used white or shades of pink, while green was a standard color for the Muslims. This color differentiation was reflective of caste and craft-based distinction prevalent in medieval societal structure of Bundi, and can be seen as a tool adopted by various communities to express their presence in the city. Most of the houses in Bundi have jharokas with stone screens on upper floors opening onto the street, but the lower levels have very few openings on the street to ensure security and privacy of the residents. Individual houses have minimal openings. Color on external facades wall paintings within the house and at the entrance doors, and motifs like elephants were used in all house forms to reflect the exuberance as well as the status of the resident family. Other significant element of the city form of Bundi are the darwajas. I mentioned briefly earlier on that there are more than 25 darwajas, and these are of different types for different purposes at various locations within the city and outside. While most darwajas was built for defense against invaders, some were constructed with secondary motive of imparting identity to clusters of resident community. This is very significant. Darwajas in Bundi can be classified in 6 types for our convenience to study them. Entrance gateways of Taragar Fort, which are the oldest. The 4 darwajas of the walled city of Bundi. Then 2 darwajas were built on an outer city wall, which was built later on. Then the darwajas which were built inside the walled city on its principal streets. Then there were smaller dwars built on secondary streets of the walled city. And finally, darwajas of the residential clusters or royal compounds, like the one that you see on your right. This is the darwaja of Amar Katla. It has 2 darwajas. This is the second of them. Now, in each of these categories, there are several examples. I won't go into the detail of all of them. You can see them on your right. This is Chaugan Darwaja, which is the main entrance to the walled city even today. It is located on the southern edge, southern side of the walled city, on southern wall. And most of these darwajas are actually not a single darwaja, but they are a combination of 2 darwajas built perpendicular to each other. This was deliberately done to create a certain amount of obstruction for an incoming invader. I see there are some questions which have come my way, so I'll surely answer them right away.
Yeah, there are lot of queries coming on. You could definitely take
I'll be happy to answer them. One of the questions says many of the small houses are painted in blue color only. No, as I said, they're painted in different colors. But yes, the blue color is dominant in the walled city because it was the blue colors houses were owned, or the houses owned by Brahmins in Kshatriya class were painted blue. Blue color is associated with royalty. And that was the reason why the houses of the upper caste or the dominant caste were painted blue. That is the reason why large part of the walled city appears to be blue. But over the period of time, because of the importance of this blue color, other communities also started using blue in past 100 years. But if you see the original walled city segments, only specific houses are colored blue. Others are colored according to their caste status as was prevalent then. The first question I could not understand, what is the Rajput capital? Well, as we know, Rajasthan was not one single state prior to 1947, but it was a cluster of several provinces, and each province had a capital. So Bundi was capital of Hadoti region or the Hadoti province. I hope this clarifies the points for now. Then coming back to our darwajas, then as I said, walled city had 4 darwajas. Chaugan Darwaja was on the south. Topkhana Darwaja was the inner darwaja of Chaugan Darwaja. Shukla Darwaja was located in the northeast. Bhairav Darwaja on the west. Meera Darwaja on the east. While Lanka Darwaja and Khoja Darwaja were built on the outer city wall, as you will see in the plans going forward. The second kind of darwajas, Kotwali Darwaja, Nagarpol, were built inside the city. So this darwaja that you see, Nagarpol and Kotwali Darwaja, these are inside the walled city, built on the principal street leading to Gad Mahal from the main entrance of wall city, that is Chaugan Darwaza. So these actually created segregation within the wall city to secure it further. The third type of Darwaja, as I had mentioned, are the entrance gates to the clusters. So this is Chenrai Katla Darwaza. Katla means a cluster. And this is a Dwar, a smaller Darwaja on the secondary street. While this graceful entrance Darwaja that you see is the outer Darwaja of Amar Katla. So it is reflective of the affluence, importance, status of the residents. The other significant feature of the city form of Bundi is, of course, the water architecture. Bundi is one of the best examples of medieval Indian city exhibiting water harvesting methods adopted at city level, as well as of water architecture that was created in the form of buildings and structures like Bawdis and Kunds. All the lakes and some of the most important Bawdis and Kunds were planned outside wall city along major regional roads to provide water to the travelers as well as the citizens residing outside the city. There are a few more questions. Is the dominant blue color of the houses and embellishments on the wall in any way related to Rajput history? Of course, it is related to Rajput history, particularly its social and cultural history. The next is a question from Misha Kamath. What is it that makes Bundi different from other cities of Rajasthan? This is a very important and interesting question, and perhaps the reason why I chose to study Bundi in great detail. It is because Bundi province was a very small one. The people over there did not have, the rulers themselves did not have much resources. As you have seen, the geography, it was very tough. It was a very small area. To create something so magnificent and so diverse and so vast in such a small place makes Bundi so very different. Secondly, it is very small in terms of its physical size. So most of these heritage structures or even the walled city is very compact. You can walk from one end of the city of Bundi to the next, not more than 15-20 minutes. So this compactness of Bundi and the color and gaiety that you have just seen in some of the colorful houses and different kind of structures that were created makes Bundi so very different because it is very informal. It is not formally planned as Jaipur is. And the relationship between the city, palace, and the fort is much more closer than what you see in Jodhpur or Udaipur, where the city and the fort had a distinct and a very separate identity unrelated to the wall city itself. Here, they are almost fused with each other, which makes it very interesting to travel through, to see them, and to experience them together. The location of Bawdis and Kunds outside the wall city was also influenced by social considerations. Like access to Bawdis and Kunds within the wall city was controlled. The lower caste did not have access to the fresh water from the Bawdi or for the Kund. And therefore, the Hada rulers built Bawdis and Kunds outside the wall city where everybody could access them. Not only the lower caste, but also the army as well as the travelers and visitors to the city of Bundi. Because as you know, during medieval times, the city doors used to be closed in the evening. So no traveler or even a resident of Bundi could come back inside the city after sunset. So for them to, those people who were staying outside, they needed water for their dinner as well as for bathing next morning. So these techniques, these considerations played a role in siting of Bawdis and Kunds outside the wall city. One of the most important features, I said, are lakes. There are 4 lakes in Bundi, more than 50 Bawdis, Kunds, and Sagarmal. We'll see them now in a sequence. There are a few questions which I'll take now. Uh, One question is, are the Bowries still operational for the local residents? Unfortunately, fortunately, the Bowries have water, but they're not being used, which is unfortunate. The contemporary or recent planning that has been done has neglected the potential of these important water structures which they are capable of still serving the community. And this is the drawback of the planning.
In
How
fact,
much?
I was so
Yeah,
asked on that question, Charudat, that considering the extensive network of Bauris that we have in entire Rajasthan and also in Gujarat, in fact, they are so famous. And not only have there been reservoirs for water, but also the sheer architectural delight along. Why is it that we are neglecting our heritage and our architecture in the way that we are? And what is it that we could do to kind of bring it back to life?
it's an interesting and very important question which has been bothering all of us, all planners. One problem that I can tell you as a professional who has been in this field a certain length of time is because of the top-down approach in planning, where we have set templates of planning, which regardless of the local situation are imposed on the people and the place with complete disregard as to what the heritage, both natural and man-made, is of that particular place. So if this approach were to be turned around and if the planning is done bottoms up, then most of these problems would be solved. Because what is the point in having an extensive water supply network when you are not utilizing these very water structures like Kunj and Baudi, which have existed and served the community for 300 years? So they certainly are usable. They are, provided we give them certain significance that they deserve in the city's fabric. So this effort has been made in some places. In fact, Intact did restoration of one Baudi in Bundi, which I'll show you, which has helped people use that water, if not for drinking purposes, but for all other non-drinking purposes. And that has been helpful. Secondly, laying of water supply lines within the walled city fabric, it is not an easy task. Last time when I'd been to Bundi, half the walled city was dug up to lay up the pipelines. And this, while the water structures which are existing are being overlooked.
Yeah, what a pity. What a pity that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I think,
How many?
would you agree that even if sometimes a structure that is so wealthy in its sheer creation, even if sometimes it cannot be used for its original purpose, there are so many innovative ways to bring it back to life. And if we see so many parts of Europe, for that matter, the way they have gone about preserving their architecture and the work that was created over the centuries is something I think where we as a country have a lot to learn, don't we?
Exactly. Very true. And one of the most important lessons is you have to use that facility or that structure for the purpose to which it was meant, or close to that, not with the same intensity, but for the same purpose. You may diversify that, but if you don't use water from Bowery, it's going to stagnate. As simple as that. You can't create an artificial function or a new activity inside Bowery. Neither can you close it down. So we need to devise a simple method of reutilizing them to a limited extent to keep them alive. If temples are closed and not used, how can we conserve them? You can't conserve them artificially and convert them into a museum. It is impossible and it is unrealistic. But if the temples, Baudis, kunds, palaces, if they are used, as you can see in most of the heritage hotels, they are surviving because they are used. If you
Yes.
don't use them, they're going to decay.
Absolutely. No, there's such an important learning coming from their viewers that as inheritors of so much legacy and so much heritage, it is our bounden duty to, to carry on the legacy provided to us by our ancestors and people who have created such a lot of wealth. So we must go and visit these places. We must create an interest that we are interested in seeing these places, and that in turn leads to preservation and conservation of these places. And the more they are conserved, the more they are visited. So it's like a cycle, and I think we need to join that
Absolutely.
cycle of life in a country like India, where the wealth just goes back not only to a few hundred years, but actually goes back to more than 3 millennia. I mean, if we talk of places like Rakhi Gadi, and if we look at the Harappan civilization, I mean, there is just so much in India, And Charudat, I must say that every single time that we are taken by somebody like you, who's a specialist, to a place in India, all of us are like, oh my God, we never knew that our country has so much wealth. So I must compliment you for bringing to us such an amazing, I would say, splendor of India. Please carry on.
Yes, ma'am. The other element that is very important and worth studying, or subject of research itself, is the temples in Bundi. At the outset, let me tell you that what I mentioned earlier, that after the Hada Rajputs started serving the Mughals, they were appointed governors. And because of their bravery, their fearless character, and then their loyalty to their rulers, they were made governors of very important provinces of the Mughals. A lot of people don't know that the governor of Mughal capital of Delhi was Hada Rajput. Governor of Varanasi was Hada Rajput. When, particularly in case of Varanasi, when Rao Raja Bhoj served as the governor of Banaras, Varanasi, he was exposed to Hindu culture of a different kind than what he was used to back home in Rajasthan. He brought back a lot of influences. Therefore, the temple designs and character of temples in the way in which they were used is very different. First thing that you'll notice is almost all temples in Bundi are completely non-monumental. They are not huge. This is a very interesting thing. Otherwise, in most of the other provinces in India, medieval times, you'll find that the kings or the rulers trying to impress upon their subjects by creating massive temples. Here they are very humble in scale. Secondly, the diversity in the design types. Normally, classical method of Nagara style temple were used in northern India, which you see on the right side, this image of Navleshwar Mahadev temple. So where you have a shikhar and a mandapa, all aligned on the east-west axis. And between them, you have the Ardha Mandapa. Now, this kind of a standard classical dictum of temple design was completely changed in Bundi. This is very interesting. Can you see that the picture on the right is actually a temple? This is a Shiv temple. And more importantly, it is a combination of a cenotaph and a temple. So the lower part is actually a Shiv temple. On top of it, a chhatri has been built in memory of a departed Hada ruler, that is Anirudh Singh. Now, this is very radical. This temple that you see is one of the most important temples in Bundi, Char Bhujanath Mandir. So here what they have done is, the actual temple complex is here. In Bundi, all the temples are built at a great height. And that creates a long linear staircase which goes up to them, goes up to the mandapa of the temple or the entrance, and thereafter towards the shikhar. At the foot of the staircase, they used to create small miniature temples. In this case, those miniature temples have become large temples by themselves. So it looks like a cluster. But as you will see in later examples that I show you, that these temple designs were created with so much of freedom and liberty by the craftsmen as well as the designers in the Hada province and particularly Bundi, which is indicative of a certain amount of liberal attitude that persisted at that in that community during those times, which is quite interesting. this is what I was saying. You will see that all these temples, they are built virtually on the first floor. A staircase starting from the ground reaches up to the first floor, and then we enter into the Dwar as well as the Mandapa and the Shikhara beyond. So you can see the Kalyanji Mandir, Radha Damodar Mandir, Baldev Mandir. This is very interesting. In fact, there is a shop below. Behind that is actually a small kund, and there's staircase, and the temple is here. And then we have, this is Lakshmanath Mandir as well as, which I mentioned, Naleshwar Mahadev Mandir. These are the oldest of them. So this liberalization happened in the 16th and the 17th century, while these temples were built earlier. Now, Naleshwar Mahadev temple got submerged inside a lake which was created later on. It is called as Naval Sagar Lake, named after the deity housed in this temple, that is Naleshwar Mahadev. But till then, it was a Nagara style temple, as you can see on the right side. This diversity in temple form certainly is a very, very interesting feature of the temple typology of structures in Rajasthan, Bundi. There are a lot of questions. I will take few. Didn't the Minas leave a mark on the architecture of city? If yes, then kindly highlight. Yes, the Minas left important heritage, and that was not in the form of structures, as in temples or palaces, but in terms of lake. Because most of the work that it did has not survived, or as was the process then, it was rebuilt. Certain structures were rebuilt on what they must have created. But the lake that was constructed, the Jait Sagar Lake, which we will see now, it was initiated by the Meena tribes. Secondly, as I mentioned, the fort Taragarh, its initial embankments, initial fortifications were built by the Meena tribes. But we don't have any other residual structures during those times. There is some question on this top-down planning. What is that a standard government pattern of functioning with respect to town planning? What about local planning bodies? I would suggest that although the question is very interesting and I would love to answer, but this is not the appropriate occasion for that. You could get back to me later on email. I'll be happy to clarify this for you. Why Chitrashala is not properly looked after? In my last visit, I noticed carelessness. Is it not the best art gallery of Bundi, Kalam, Bundi School of Painting, and should be maintained to preserve? Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And the reasons for that we'll briefly discuss as we move forward. Now coming back to our presentation. So the architectural heritage going forward, so far we have seen the history of Bundi briefly and the city form and key elements of the city structure. I'll now present briefly the building typologies and the heritage examples within them. In the first category, that is the Garh, which is also, Garh means a fort. We have only one, that is Taragarh, obviously. Then in Garh Mahal, the cluster, largest structure in Bundi, and the most important one, although it is called as once called as well as seen as Mahal, one single Mahal, it is actually a cluster, a gigantic cluster of several smaller Mahals built successively over a period of 200 years. So those include Bhoj Mahal, Ratan Mahal, Chhattar Mahal, Aniruddh Mahal, Umaid Mahal, and of course Chitrashala and Charbagh. We'll see them in briefly. Then Bawri is more than 50, as I said, but I have chosen to have only 4, Nahardukki Bawri and the 3 more. Kund, I have chosen to select, I've chosen 5 of them, then Sagar Mahals, and finally the Chhatris, which together constitute a major chunk of architectural heritage of Bundi. This is a close-up view of the Garh. This is the Taragarh fort. Down here you see its external wall, which also engulfs the Garh Mahal, which is at the foot of Taragarh, midway between the city and the fort, then rises up back. The Taragarh is visible from the city, and most of its key features like Shiv Mandir, which I mentioned earlier, this is where it stands. The Bhim Burj, we'll discuss that. These were some of the important elements which stood on the skyline of Bundi. Taragarh is indeed the most visible landmark on skyline of Bundi and is one of the oldest forts in Rajasthan. It sits 245 meters above the city and has grand view of the entire hinterland, which was necessary for its defense purposes. Now, this is the plan of Taragarh Fort. It is actually has 3 walls, fortified. It was heavily fortified, 3 walls, a lot of bastions, and 3 entrance gateways. So this is the main fort, and these are the secondary walls, which then come down and engulf the palace itself. But the main entrance to the fort was from the east side through a complex of 2 gateways, that is Lakshman Pol and Ram Pol, combined together one after another to increase the defensive capabilities of the entrance gate. Then we have similarly 2 gates on the western side, Chand Pol, and to northwest, Kun Pol and Ganesh Pol. Within the fort itself, there are several structures which are noteworthy and demand attention. We are looking at the southwestern part of the fort. This is the main entrance as we climb up the hill from the palace onto Taragarh. This is Ram Pol. Below that is Lakshman Pol. First we enter Lakshman Pol, then climb up further into Ram Pol. Beyond that, as we enter inside, we have kunds, we have a palace, we have smaller palaces built right on top of the fortified wall itself, because initially these were occupied by the generals and the top military officials, so they could overlook the western side, because after the Hada Rajputs started serving the Mughals, they were in constant conflict with their cousins and blood relatives, that is the Ranas of Mewar and their family. Therefore, the western pass had to be always guarded. Therefore, you'll see more establishments and garrisons placed on the southwestern corner, which open towards the western part leading towards Mewar. So these are the 3 gateways of entrance gateways of Taragarh. We have Lakshman Pol, which is the first one. Beyond that is Ram Pol. You can see there is a massive difference in character of these gates, while the outer one is very simple because it serves the primary purpose of defense, while the internal one has an observatory on top, as well as offices of the administration as well as the military. This is the Chamanda Pol, which is on the western side, and Ganesh Pol and Kun Pol, which are again a cluster of 2 gates on the northwestern corner. Inside the fort, which I mentioned, is a large mahal, which was the original residence of the Hada Rajput before Garh Mahal was constructed. So it retains the qualities of a traditional Rajput Haveli, and therefore it demonstrates lesser influence of Islamic or Mughal architecture. So you can still see brackets as well as corbelled structure supporting the roof and trabete system of column and beams instead of arches, which were to emerge more forcefully going forward. This mahal itself is divided in several parts. I won't go into all the details, it will take a lot of time, but this is for your information that the entire Rani Mahal is a completely introvert palace, small palace as you would expect, and it has clear distinction of Mardana and Zanana zone, as we see in all palaces of Rajasthan and in northern India. And this is called as the Todumal Ki Haveli, which served as the public area where men were permitted and served as darbar of the king. Interestingly, this Rani Mahal also has a hammam, which we know is a bath, which is very, very radical and new. because in area where you have water scarcity, to have hammam is a very curious thing. Here we can see certain Persian influence which has crept in, which was properly utilized by the Hada Rajputs by constructing a kund outside next to this palace, which provided water to this hammam throughout the year. So it remained functional and not just an addition to the palace. Now, this is a very interesting structure in Deepak Mahal, which I still have not been able to figure out what its purpose was. I can only speculate. I've never seen a structure like this. It is square in plan and it does not have any windows outside. It has 4 entrances on 4 cardinal directions: due north, due east, this side south and west. And inside the square plan, again, it has a chamber created, or a small pavilion created inside its hall, which has 4 columns, as you can see, and an elevated plinth, which gives us which gives the central area a distinctive importance. But most importantly, it has a double wall, in a sense that it has an outer wall and then inner wall. As you can see, this is the outer wall. It has a corridor around this, and then these columns. And between this outer wall, there is a staircase in 4 corners. And this place, if you don't have windows and these doors obviously were to be shut, it must have been served by ventilation, for light and ventilation. They created a unique system. Here you can see on the top, they created air vents, which went directly to the terrace. Therefore, the ventilation was established through this complex process of ducting, which is, these ducts were constructed in the masonry, the wall itself, external wall. That means it's lighting. For lighting, they did not depend on natural light. That means lamps must have been used. And that is the reason this palace is called as Deepak Mahal, because always lit by lamps, by Deepak. But therefore, but still, the reasons for such curious structure, because it was not religious. So it must have been used for some very peculiar recreational or spiritual or some ritual of the royal family or important royal member. Then there are 4 kunds which have been built in Taragarh. These kunds have very different character. In fact, the first kund built in Bundi is this Durjivan Kund. It was the first kund that was built in Bundi. It was built in the 15th century. But here you can see, unlike some of the other kunds that we will see, it does not have a gradual, does not have wide series of steps which gradually lead towards its base. Instead, it has vertical walls on its 4 sides with narrow staircases leading down to the base. So these are more like water tanks, which they were. So because on Taragarh, you could not build bawdis because the water table on that hill would have been extremely deep. Therefore, they constructed these kunds which survived, or which collected and harvested rainwater and preserved the water throughout the year, not only for the people to consume, but for construction of these palaces and structures that were built on Taragarh. Therefore, they have a character more like tanks than like a traditional kund. Some of the other structures which are interesting include the Bhim Burj, and as I had mentioned, the Chhatri of Anirudh Singh Ji, which has a temple underneath it. Now we come to the most important structure of Bundi, that is Garh Mahal. While Taragarh crowns the crest of the tallest hill of Bundi, Garh Mahal dominates the skyline of Bundi with its majestic form, which cascades down into the city below. This is a gigantic cluster of several individual palaces. So this main entrance to the Garh Mahal is from the eastern side through Hathipol. Then as I was mentioning, it is a cluster of Mahal. You have Chhattar Mahal on the southwestern side, Bhoj Mahal, a structure called as Old Palace of southwestern corner, Anirudh Mahal, And this large structure that you see, Umaid Mahal, and finally this one in the center, opening from the Hathi pole, is Ratan Mahal. On the northeastern corner, this large structure is an artificial landscape courtyard built above a small palace at the bottom. It is called a Charbagh, a direct influence of traditional Mughal gardens, which were which found its influence in Bundi during the time of Umaid Singh in late 18th century. Mind you, this entire palace was never built at one point of time. It actually started from this southwestern corner, and then it was built in the easterly direction, then towards north, finally completing the entire complex in course of 200 years of its history. We'll see the sequence of its development in a second. This was the old palace. This is north, this is south, this is east and west. So on the southwestern corner was the old palace, which existed prior to the Hada Rajputs coming to Bundi, which was occupied by them. Then the first mahal was built by Rao Raja Bhoj. Therefore, it is called as Bhoj Mahal. It had a courtyard and two pavilions, one above the other. On the northern side, his son, when he ascended the throne, Rao Raja Ratan Singh built a very large Diwan-e-Aam. Rao Raja Ratan Singh, who had also was serving in the Mughal court and influenced by what he saw there, he created much larger Diwan-e-Aam than what existed at this point of time. And he built a central courtyard and a grand new entrance, which was named as Hathi Pole, facing due east as per the Vastu Shastras. And this finally got enclosed by a structure built on the northern edge. After Rao Ratan Singh, his son, Rao Raja Chhatrasal, built Chhattar Mahal on the southeastern corner, thus enclosing this entire complex. Then his nephew, Anirudh Singh, built Anirudh Mahal on immediately north of Old Palace. This was because all these areas which were built were largely Mardana. These were royal, administrative, and public areas where men were permitted. The women folk always stayed in the Old Palace. So as the family size increased, they needed a Zanana zone. So Anirudh Mahal is a vertical cluster. You would be very surprised to see its plan and the way it has been designed. It is a multi-storied structure without a single window from outside. It is a 4-storied structure, which has in each of these domes is reflective of a chamber below it. So each of the queens used to use them, and below them the servants used to stay, and all of them were opening into the central courtyard. After that, Umaid Mahal was built by Rao Raja Umaid Singh along with Chitrashala here and Charbagh. Thus, this entire complex of Garh Mahal was completed by the late 18th century. So though it looks monolithic today, contiguous, this part existed earlier, then gradually it was expanded. So expansion is so seamless, it seems that the whole thing was built at single point of time, which is not the case.
Wow. Charuda, I am just going to interfere with such an amazing presentation going on that how many more slides do we have? Because if we have too many, then we'll put it as a recorded repository, viewers, because we are already ahead of 12 noon. So
yes, so I would say that beyond this, because there are several, so we can keep that on record.
I suggest then we will put it as a collection on a recorded webinar for the viewers to go back to it, because I did want to ask you a couple of questions before we wind up for the day.
Yeah, please.
One very important thing, and we are trying to create the repository, both from the point of view of travelers and tourists who go there, but also from the perspective of the locals on how they themselves can use their own heritage to create entrepreneurial, employment for themselves. And as I was mentioning to you before the webinar, that the Ministry of Tourism is running the Incredible India Tourist Facilitator certification program, which is essentially creating the guides, the local hosts in various parts of India. How do you think people in Bundi could use a presentation of this kind to leverage so much that they have?
I think it will be immensely useful to them for two reasons. Based on my personal experience in Bundi and other places in Rajasthan, as well as in Gujarat, MP, the local guides, although they have a lot of enthusiasm, they are a bit short on authentic history. That is one. Secondly, there will be, once they are, such a knowledge base is shared with them in such a simple form, it will help them to convey the heritage as well as the potential to their prospective customers and clients more forcefully, with more confidence and with more authenticity. This will help in a long run for the customers to feel the satisfaction that they have gained something authentic, because there's a difference between folklore and authentic history. That is one part. The second thing, which is already existing in Bundi and other places, is I've seen the knowledge base of the local guides is very strong on social and religious and cultural practices. What they need support is on the technical, architectural, planning aspects. Once that is given, I think their entire package of support that they need to provide to their clientele will get complete, and it will be immensely helpful for them.
Right. And, what is very important from the traveler perspective, I think, is to go to a place with the local, because the way you learn everything about a place from a local can never be substituted by somebody coming from outside. And therefore, I must share with you, viewers, I learned two things. I learned from a local who is part of my team that how you pronounce khamma ghani. So the ghani, and the way they say it, I think I can never say it. And the other learning that came for me, because when you look at the way Bundi, Bundi, no, it's not Bundi. Viewers shared with me and said it's Bundi. So these are the small little nuances that we learn from locals and people who actually belong to that area. On that, I must ask you, Charudat, that what is your favorite food from Bundi?
Bundi. Well, I've had dal bhati there often when I am traveling to Bundi, because that is something, as we know, Bundi is largely vegetarian. So I'm not a vegetarian, but I love the vegetarian food in Bundi, because the way they cook is very different than what you get in Mumbai or other places, or even Delhi. I used to be in Delhi. So that is something which is my favorite. Apart from some of the dishes we make locally, chutneys, which are quite spicy, and they are served with dal bati. But very interesting thing that I've seen in Bundi is there are more French restaurants and Italian restaurants in Bundi than Indian or traditional Rajasthani food chains or food stores. So Rajasthani food we get in the homestays that we have, and even the small, nice hotels that are there in Bundi. But there is no dearth of Italian food, and that has been fascinating for me to see. Yes, because of the Italian and the French visitors to Bundi.
But that's also, it spells so much about how the world is so amalgamated and how we take on the traditions of each other. I guess that's a learning there in any case.
Exactly.
So, while we are talking about this, I must also remember and wish everybody that these are days of Pujo. Durga Pujo is on, and it is such a delightful time normally. But of course, this year, because of COVID and because we are respecting social distancing, we do need to be careful as people still, and therefore we need to wear our masks and we need to maintain social distancing. Nevertheless, these are wonderful days of remembering and invoking the blessings of Durga. And we had posted on our handles on Incredible India viewers, and I must read out for you that as the daunting Durga stands untamed, bold, yet warm with her aura, so should we with our idea of being. The vibrant face, wide eyed vigor, and brawny hands, both invisible and visible, holding a zillion responsibility, is evident of what a woman is capable of. This Mahanami, let's awake the supreme soul within each one of us. Let's bid farewell to Ma with folded hands, seeking blessings. Let's celebrate the invincible Durga. So I think these are such special days. In India, we shall soon have the Shara and Diwali, and this is festival time, but it's also time for all of us to be, as I said, respect the norms of social distancing. Please wash your hands. Please wear your mask when you're in public. Take adequate care. Stay safe. Stay healthy. So that right now, when we are bringing you all these beautiful places of India on a virtual platform, you can all start heading back to them with all due precautions being in place. I'm afraid we will not be able to take all the slides forward from Bundi, but we will be putting the entire recording on our website, Ministry of Tourism's website, that is tourism.gov.in. All the webinars are placed on the website. Please visit them. Please share them with family and friends. Support us in our initiative of bringing to you your beautiful country in so many different ways and forms. Before I tell you where we are going to go next week, I'm going to ask Charudat to make his one last quick, takeaway for a traveler to Bundi. And I also want to thank you, Charudat, for bringing us such an amazing presentation. But before we close, I'm going to ask you to say something for everybody.
Yes, this effort of from my end has been not only this presentation, but also what you mentioned that I'm writing on Bundi is primarily to present information about Bundi to a larger audience, because this place is not only just fascinating place, but it is a place ideal for visitors and tourists of all kinds of, for all age groups from various different regions, because of the kind of community that resides in Bundi. Not only are they hospitable, but the place is extremely secure, safe, and immensely enjoyable in terms of opportunity you get to explore the place. You don't have to worry about traveling, using any vehicle. You just have to walk, and that's the end of it. Food is available of every kind. Hotels, very nice ones, small, of every income category, serving every kind of budget are available. Guides we mentioned briefly, there are so many of them, extremely knowledgeable, very informative. In fact, with some of them, I'm still conversing on a regular basis for my book to gather information, and they've been extremely helpful in sharing that. And I've seen this with other tourists whom I've met there, that they have come there repeatedly. They've come there for several times. So Bundi is a place where people don't normally visit for 1 or 2 days. They visit that place to experience it, to live there, not just merely to see it. So it is a place which I would recommend everybody should visit, particularly the youngsters, because there is not merely history. The natural setting of the place offers ample opportunities, right from trekking to adventurism, adventure sports, they have already started. And of course, a glance at a traditional, authentic Rajasthani society, which still retains its charm and character, which has existed for the last 400 years. So that is what makes this place so fascinating. Not merely just
right. You don't just go there for a day or two. You go live there. You immerse yourself. Eat the dal bati churma. Have all the spicy chutneys. And viewers, I am reminded, and it's so wonderful to keep getting inputs from all of you as we go live in this program, that I must not forget, I was actually getting so engrossed in Bundi that I was half forgetting that it's also Mahashtami. These are days of Navratra. And not only in Bengal is there fervor of puja, and not only in Bengal, but actually all over India, puja goes the way it does, but it's also times of Navratri, it's time of Garba, it's time of energy. Good weather is setting in, and we are sure that as a country, COVID will be behind us, and we shall very soon be emerging very strong. Once again, traveling, going around, celebrating festivals, celebrating marriages, celebrating just being together and traveling in our beautiful, incredible country. Well, today from Bundi, we are going to take you on the 31st of October to a very different component that we have in India, and that's going on a cruise in the Ganga. So we're going to take you to a very different journey, and we hope you're going to join us on the 31st, next Saturday at 11 a.m., as we are going to go meander in the holy waters of Ganga River. So today from Bundi, thank you very much for supporting us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us. Do keep safe, do keep healthy, and keep viewing Dekho Apna Desh webinar series. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you, Charudat. Thank you, team NTD. Thank you all the viewers. Thank you so very much. Namaste. Happy Navratri. And also very soon a happy Dashera. Let the good win over the evil. Namaste.
Bye.